HOA Karen filled my pool with detergent, tried to harm my kids and spoil our party. Let me tell you exactly what happened that day. Hey there everyone. Adam Khan here. I never thought I'd be making a video about neighborhood drama, but here we are. Let me tell you how moving to what we thought was our dream home turned into an absolute nightmare, and eventually, a soapy disaster that you wouldn't believe unless you saw it. About 8 months ago, my wife Sarah and I packed up our life in Chicago and moved our 2 kids, Zane, who's 8, and little Amina, who just turned 6, down to sunny Tampa, Florida. After years of freezing winters and endless snow shoveling, we were ready for palm trees and pool days. I'd gotten this amazing job offer with better pay, better hours, and the chance to finally give our family the lifestyle we'd been dreaming about. When we first drove into Sunny Pines Estates, it looked like something out of a magazine. Perfect green lawns, beautiful Spanish-style homes with terracotta roofs, community parks with actual working fountains, the whole 9 yards. Our realtor kept mentioning how the property values were stable because of the very active HOA, but honestly, I wasn't really listening. I was too busy imagining weekend barbecues and watching the kids play in our backyard without having to bundle them up in 5 layers first. Those first few weeks were exactly what we'd hoped for. Our neighbors brought over welcome baskets. The kids made friends almost immediately at the community playground. Sarah and I finally got to wear shorts in February. We spent our weekends exploring Tampa, visiting the beaches, and slowly turning our new house into a home. Everything seemed perfect. I remember finding the HOA welcome packet in our mailbox about a week after we moved in. It was this thick binder full of rules and regulations, but I just tossed it on the shelf in my home office. We'll get to that later, I told Sarah. How bad could it be? Everyone seems so nice here. Oh man, if I could go back in time and slap myself. Because little did I know that behind those perfect lawns and friendly smiles lurked the most terrifying creature known to homeowners. An HOA Karen with a power complex and way too much time on her hands. And I was about to become her next target. Looking back now, I should have seen the warning signs from day one. We hadn't even finished unpacking all our boxes when the first HOA letter arrived. A bright yellow envelope stuck to our front door, not even properly mailed, just taped there for all the neighbors to see. The offense? Our trash cans were visible from the street, apparently a Class A violation according to Sunny Pines HOA bylaws, Section 4, Paragraph 12. Who numbers their violations like that? It felt like getting a parking ticket for your own driveway. But we were new and Sarah is always the peacemaker. Let's just follow the rules, Adam, she said. We want to make a good impression. So I dutifully built a little wooden enclosure for our trash cans that weekend. Problem solved, or so I thought. It was at the neighborhood welcome barbecue the following weekend when I first met her. Patricia Wilson, HOA board president and self-appointed neighborhood watchdog. She was exactly what you'd expect. Perfectly highlighted bob haircut, designer sunglasses perched on her head, and that permanent expression of someone who just smelled something unpleasant. Oh, you must be the new family from Chicago, was it? She said, somehow making Chicago sound like I'd said we were from the bottom of a swamp. Your trash can solution is creative, though not quite matching the approved design specifications. Before I could respond, she was already moving on, whispering to another board member and gesturing toward our direction. Sarah squeezed my hand under the table, our universal signal for, let it go. But that was just the beginning. Over the next few weeks, the yellow envelopes kept coming. Our mailbox was approximately 0.75 inches too tall, according to HOA standards. The garden gnome Amina had picked out for her new garden patch was not from the approved lawn ornament catalog. Even the shade of beige I'd used to touch up our garage door was apparently desert sand, when it should have been coastal dune. Because apparently there's a difference. Each time Sarah would calm me down. It's not worth fighting about, Adam. Let's just fix it and move on. So I lowered the mailbox, put away Amina's gnome, which resulted in a full day of tears, and repainted the entire garage door with the precious coastal dune that cost 3 times as much as regular beige paint. I was really trying to be the bigger person. But every time I fixed one thing, Patricia would find something else. It was like living under a microscope, and slowly the dream neighborhood was starting to feel more like a prison with really nice landscaping. What Patricia didn't know was that her constant nitpicking was lighting a fuse in me. I'm normally a pretty laid-back guy, but there's only so many yellow envelopes a man can take before he snaps. Little did I know that my breaking point would involve a swimming pool, several gallons of detergent, and a garden hose that would change the power dynamics of Sunny Pines Estates forever. By the time May rolled around, we'd gotten a crash course in HOA compliance. Our house was officially up to Patricia's standards, at least on the outside, and we'd learned to just grit our teeth and nod whenever we saw her walking the neighborhood with her clipboard. But something else was also happening as spring turned to summer in Florida. It was getting hot. And not Chicago summer hot. I'm talking walk outside and immediately regret all your life choices hot. The kids were miserable. After school, Zayn and Amina would flop dramatically on the living room floor, complaining that they were literally melting. We tried everything: popsicles, water balloon fights, even one of those sad little inflatable kiddie pools. But nothing was cutting it. The community pool was nice enough, but it was always crowded, and honestly, Patricia seemed to spend an awful lot of time there, watching everyone like a lifeguard with a badge instead of a whistle. "Dad, please can we get a real pool?" Zayn asked one evening, his face still flushed from the heat despite the AC blasting. "Tyler has one and it's awesome." Tyler was Mike's son from next door, and their backyard pool had become the stuff of legends in our house. Sarah and I had actually been discussing it already. The backyard was certainly big enough, and with the money we were saving on heating costs compared to Chicago, it wasn't completely out of reach financially. But there was one giant, HOA-shaped obstacle in our way. "If we do this," I told Sarah that night after the kids were in bed, "we have to do it by the book. Every form, every approval, every ridiculous specification. I can't give Patricia any ammunition." The next day, I pulled out the dreaded HOA binder and actually read the section on external home improvements and water features. It was like deciphering ancient hieroglyphics, but I took notes, made diagrams, and even called in a pool contractor who specialized in HOA-compliant installations. The application I submitted was a masterpiece: 25 pages of detailed plans, material samples, landscaping adjustments, noise reduction strategies, and water conservation measures. I even included a 3D rendering of the finished project showing that it would actually increase our property value and, by extension, the neighborhood's overall appeal. It was the most professional thing I'd ever created, including presentations I'd given to Fortune 500 companies. Then came the waiting. 3 excruciating weeks of checking the mailbox every day, jumping whenever the phone rang. The kids asked about it constantly, and I kept having to tell them that we didn't know yet, that Ms. Wilson and her committee had to approve it first. When the envelope finally arrived, white this time, not yellow, my hands were actually shaking as I opened it. Sarah and the kids gathered around, all of us holding our breath. "Conditional approval," I read aloud, and the kids erupted in cheers. But the conditions, of course, were pure Patricia. The fence around the pool needed to be a specific height and material. The pool pump could only run between certain hours to preserve neighborhood tranquility. No pool toys could be visible from the street or neighboring yards when not in use. And most ridiculous of all, we had to give 2 weeks' notice before having more than 5 people using the pool at once. Still, it was an approval. Construction could begin. "We're getting a pool. We're getting a pool." Amina danced around the kitchen, her earlier complaints about the heat forgotten in the excitement. What I didn't tell the kids was the sinking feeling I had as I read through those conditions. This wasn't the end of Patricia's involvement, it was just the beginning. And something told me she wasn't going to make this easy. The construction crew arrived on a Monday, and so did Patricia Wilson. I'm not exaggerating when I say her Lexus SUV slowed to a crawl in front of our house the minute the first excavator pulled up. She didn't even try to be subtle about it. "Good morning," she called out, wearing what I can only describe as safari chic, like she was dressed to observe wildlife rather than a pool installation. "Just making sure everything's proceeding according to the approved plans." I forced a smile and waved. "Morning, Patricia. Don't worry, we're following everything to the letter." That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. Every single day of construction, Patricia would happen to walk by. Sometimes twice. Always with her phone out, taking pictures, making notes. She questioned the contractors about their permits, about the depth measurements, about the tile selection, as if she was the building inspector, pool safety commissioner, and interior designer all rolled into one. "Is that the approved shade of pool liner? It looks more tropical blue than Mediterranean azure to me," she said on day 3, squinting critically at the materials. The crew foreman, Carlos, caught my eye and gave me a sympathetic look. Later, when Patricia left, he walked over and sighed. "Every neighborhood has one amigo. We see them all the time. How do you deal with it?" I asked. "Documentation," he said simply, tapping his tablet. "I take pictures of everything, date and time stamp it. When they complain, and they always complain, I have proof we did exactly what was approved." Smart man, Carlos. I started doing the same thing. By the second week, even Sarah's endless patience was wearing thin. She was peering over our fence this morning while I was having coffee, she told me. Just standing there with her clipboard, staring at the construction. I asked if she needed anything and she said she was documenting pool depth for safety compliance. Adam, is that even her job? It wasn't. And I was reaching my limit. That's when I met Mike properly. We'd waved to each other before but never really talked. He came over one evening while I was checking on the construction progress. She's something else, isn't she? He said, nodding toward Patricia's house. That's one way to put it, I replied. You know, we had a koi pond installed last year. Nothing fancy, just a small water feature. She claimed it was a mosquito breeding ground and tried to make us fill it in. What happened? I asked. Turns out, the HOA bylaws specifically allow water features under a certain size. I had to hire a surveyor to prove our pond was exactly 4 inches below the maximum allowable depth. He laughed, but it was the laugh of someone who'd been through battle. She's got it out for anybody who tries to enjoy their own property, Mike continued. The Johnsons moved out because of her. Their kids couldn't even use their trampoline because she kept reporting them for excessive noise. As we talked, Mike told me about other neighbors who'd run afoul of Patricia. The retired couple who wanted to paint their door red. The young family who installed solar panels. The single mom who put up a basketball hoop for her teenager. Word of advice, Mike said as he headed back to his yard. Get security cameras. Not just for thieves, for Patricia. Trust me on this one. That night, I ordered a set of weatherproof cameras with night vision and motion detection. Something told me we'd need them sooner rather than later. Little did I know how right Mike was, or how crucial those cameras would turn out to be. After 3 weeks of construction, inspections, and Patricia's constant surveillance, our backyard finally transformed from a dirt pit to a beautiful oasis. The pool was perfect, just the right size for our yard, with a small shallow area for Amina and a deeper end where Zane was determined to perfect his cannonball. The day the construction crew finished and filled the pool was magical. Carlos walked me through all the maintenance procedures, handed over a binder of information, still smaller than the HOA one, and shook my hand. Enjoy it, Mr. Khan. Your family is going to love this, he said, glancing around to make sure Patricia wasn't lurking nearby. Then he lowered his voice. Between us, this is one of the nicest installations we've done. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. The kids were practically vibrating with excitement, standing by the back door in their swimsuits even though I'd told them the water needed 24 hours to settle and reach the right chemical balance. The way they pressed their faces against the glass, you'd think we'd installed a chocolate fountain instead of a swimming pool. Tomorrow, I promised. First thing tomorrow we can get in. That night over dinner, Sarah brought up something we'd been discussing for weeks. So, the kids' birthdays are only 2 weeks apart, she said. What if we have one big pool party for both of them? Their first real celebration since moving here. The kids erupted in cheers before I could even respond. We could invite my whole class. Zane shouted. And mine too. Amina added, bouncing in her seat. I hesitated, thinking about the HOA's 2 weeks notice for gatherings of more than 5 people rule. But looking at their excited faces, how could I say no? Let's do it, I said. We'll make it the best pool party Sunny Pines has ever seen. The planning began immediately. Sarah created a shared document with lists of everything we needed: decorations, food, games, party favors. The kids made homemade invitations for their classmates. I, meanwhile, dutifully submitted the required resident gathering notification form to the HOA, including a list of expected attendees, planned activities, and parking arrangements for guests. Within 48 hours, I received a response, directly from Patricia, of course. Gathering approved conditionally, her email began, followed by a bullet-pointed list of restrictions that made the Pentagon look relaxed. No amplified music. Event must conclude by 6 p.m. And no more than 15 vehicles parked on the street. Pool toys must be neutral colors. No garish inflatables. No balloons, environmental hazard. All trash must be removed from site within 1 hour of event conclusion. The list went on. I showed it to Sarah, who just shook her head. We'll make it work, she said optimistically. The kids don't care about any of those things, they just want to swim with their friends. As the party date approached, our house became party planning central. We found decorations that wouldn't violate any rules. I built a special container to hide the pool toys when not in use. Sarah planned a menu that would minimize trash. The kids crossed off days on the calendar, growing more excited with each passing day. Mike stopped by as I was installing the last of our security cameras, his suggestion that had turned into what Sarah called my new obsession. Big day coming up, huh? he asked, helping me angle the camera to cover the pool area. Yeah, the kids can't wait, I replied. Just a heads up, he said, lowering his voice. Patricia's been asking other neighbors if they're concerned about the noise from your upcoming party. My heart sank. Seriously? We submitted all the paperwork. Mike nodded. That's her MO. She tries to build a coalition before she strikes. But don't worry, most of us told her to back off. I thanked him, but that night I couldn't sleep. Something felt off. I double-checked all our preparations, reviewed the HOA guidelines again, and even walked the perimeter of our property to make sure everything was in compliance. You're being paranoid, Sarah told me as I finally came to bed. What's she going to do, crash the party and measure the decibel levels? I laughed, but neither of us knew then just how far Patricia Wilson was willing to go. The day before the big party, our house was a flurry of activity. Sarah had taken the day off work, and even I wrapped up early, telling my boss it was a family situation, which technically wasn't a lie. Daddy, can we put the decorations up now? Amina asked the moment I walked through the door, already holding a stack of blue and green streamers we'd carefully selected to match the approved neighborhood color palette. I still couldn't believe there was such a thing. Let's get everything ready first, I told her, dropping a kiss on her forehead. We've got a lot to do before tomorrow. And we did. Sarah had created a military-grade checklist that covered everything from food prep to towel placement. First up was grocery shopping, which meant loading the kids into the car and heading to Costco. A trip that resulted in a cart so full I could barely see over it. Hot dogs, burger patties, veggie trays, juice boxes, ice cream, and enough chips to build a small fort. We were ready to feed an army, or in our case, 20 excited kids and their parents. Back at home, Sarah started on the make-ahead food while I cleaned the pool one final time. The water was crystal clear, the chemical balance perfect, just as Carlos had taught me. I was adjusting the skimmer when I felt that familiar prickle on the back of my neck. The sensation of being watched. I glanced up to see Patricia standing at her second-floor window, binoculars in hand, not even trying to hide the fact that she was spying on us. When she saw me notice her, she didn't even have the decency to look embarrassed. Instead, she gave a little wave and disappeared from view. Unbelievable, I muttered, climbing out of the pool. Inside, Zane was helping Sarah arrange cupcakes while Amina carefully folded paper napkins into triangles. Patricia's watching us again, I said quietly to Sarah, trying not to let the kids hear. She sighed. Just ignore her. Tomorrow is about the kids, not her. After dinner, we all worked together to set up what we could. Tables and chairs arranged strategically around the pool, but not too close, safety first. A cooler station for drinks. A designated area for presents. We hung streamers inside the house but left the outdoor decorations for the morning, knowing that evening humidity might ruin them. As the kids' bedtime approached, their excitement was reaching fever pitch. I can't sleep. Zane protested as I tucked him in. What if it rains tomorrow? What if nobody comes? What if? The weather report says sunny all day, I assured him. And your friends already RSVP'd. Everything's going to be perfect. Promise? He asked, his big brown eyes serious. Promise, I said, meaning it. I was determined to give them this perfect day, Patricia Wilson and her binoculars be damned. After the kids were finally asleep, Sarah and I collapsed on the couch with glasses of wine. I'm exhausted and the party hasn't even started, she laughed. Worth it though, I said. Did you see their faces today? They're so excited. We clinked glasses and allowed ourselves to feel good about what we'd created, not just the party but this new life in Florida. Despite the HOA drama, we were making it work. Our home, our rules, well, mostly, our happiness. Before heading to bed, I did one final perimeter check, making sure everything was secure. As I walked past the pool, I noticed Patricia's house was dark except for a single light in what I knew was her study. Something about it made me uneasy, but I brushed the feeling off. Even Patricia wouldn't mess with a children's birthday party, right? I set the security system, checked that all the cameras were working, and went to bed, mentally preparing for the chaos of hosting 20 kids and their parents tomorrow. If only I'd known what was waiting for me in the morning, I might not have slept at all. The morning of the party, I woke up early. Like crack of dawn early. Party day nervousness, I guess. I wanted to get a jump on setting up before the Florida heat kicked in, so I slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Sarah, and headed downstairs to make coffee. Cup in hand, I stepped out onto our back patio, taking a moment to appreciate the quiet. The sun was just starting to rise, casting a golden glow over our backyard. I took a deep breath, mentally going through Sarah's checklist one last time. And then I saw it. At first, I thought someone had thrown garbage into our pool, like maybe a bubble bath bottle had exploded. There was white frothy stuff all over the surface. But as I got closer, my stomach dropped. It wasn't garbage. It was foam. Massive amounts of foam covering every inch of our crystal clear pool. And not just a thin layer, I'm talking mountains of bubbles piling up nearly 2 feet high in some spots. I ran over and dipped my hand in. The water felt slippery, almost slimy, and the chemical smell hit me immediately. Detergent. Someone had dumped what must have been gallons of laundry detergent into our pool overnight. No, no, and no. I couldn't help shouting, frantically trying to scoop the foam away with my hands. A completely useless gesture given the scale of the disaster. Sarah came running out, still in her pajamas. Adam, what's wrong? What are you? She stopped dead when she saw the pool. Oh my God. What happened? Someone put detergent in the pool, I said, my voice shaking with anger. A lot of detergent. Right on cue, we heard Zayn and Amina coming downstairs, chattering excitedly about their party. Sarah and I exchanged panicked looks. Stall them, I whispered. I'll figure something out. But it was too late. The kids burst onto the patio, still in their pajamas, and immediately froze at the sight of their ruined pool. What happened to our pool? Zayn asked, his voice small. Amina's bottom lip started to quiver. Is the party cancelled? The look on their faces broke my heart. I knelt down to their level, trying to stay calm. Someone played a very mean trick on us, but we're going to fix it. But how? Zayn asked. The party's today. Good question, kid. I had no idea how to fix this. What I did know was who was responsible. The cameras, I said suddenly, turning to Sarah. We have the security cameras. I raced inside to my laptop, pulling up the security system app. The kids and Sarah huddled around me as I scrolled through the night's footage. There, at 4:48 a.m., movement by the pool gate. I clicked to play the video. The infrared night vision showed a figure in a tracksuit and gardening hat slipping into our backyard, carrying what looked like several gallon jugs. Even with the hat pulled low, there was no mistaking that distinctive bob haircut. Is that Mrs. Wilson? Sarah asked, her voice a mix of shock and fury. That's exactly who it is, I replied, watching as Patricia methodically emptied jug after jug of detergent into our pool, occasionally glancing around to make sure she wasn't being seen. Amina started crying in earnest now. Why would she do that? We didn't do anything wrong. I pulled her into a hug, my mind racing. I don't know, sweetheart. But we have proof now. This isn't right. Sarah was already on her phone. I'm calling the pool service. Maybe they can help. But I already knew what they'd say. There was no quick fix for this. The entire pool would need to be drained, cleaned, and refilled, a process that would take days, not hours. I was right. The emergency pool service guy was sympathetic but blunt. There's no way to fix this today. All that detergent has completely destroyed your chemical balance. You'd need to drain the whole thing, scrub down the surfaces to remove the detergent residue, and start over. By now, Zayn was sitting on the patio steps, head in his hands. Amina was still sniffling, clutching her favorite pool toy, a mermaid doll she'd been so excited to use at the party. I need to talk to Patricia, I said to Sarah, my voice dangerously calm. Adam? She started, concern in her eyes. I'm just going to show her the video, I assured her. She needs to see that we know what she did. As I walked next door, phone in hand with the video queued up, I noticed other neighbors starting their morning routines. Mr. Johnson getting his newspaper. The Rodriguez kids waiting for their school bus. Everyone going about their normal day, completely unaware that my children's hearts were breaking and that I was about to confront the neighborhood tyrant. One thought kept running through my head. This means war. I marched straight to Patricia's perfectly manicured front door, still wearing my pajama pants and a t-shirt. Professional appearance be damned, she'd ruined my kid's birthday party before the sun had even properly risen. 3 sharp knocks. Deep breaths. I could hear movement inside, the click of heels on tile approaching the door. When Patricia opened the door, she was already fully dressed in a tennis outfit, hair styled, makeup perfect. As if she'd been awake for hours. Which, according to my security footage, she had been. Adam? She feigned surprise, her eyes widening slightly. Is everything all right? You look disheveled. I held up my phone, screen facing her. We need to talk about this, Patricia. Her expression didn't change, but I noticed her knuckles whitening as she gripped the door a little tighter. I don't know what you're talking about. Really? Let me refresh your memory. I pressed play on the video. There she was, in her tracksuit and gardening hat, emptying jugs of detergent into our pool at 4:48 a.m. As she watched, her face went through a fascinating transformation. Shock, then denial, then calculation. But not a hint of shame or remorse. "That could be anyone," she said dismissively. "The quality is terrible. Patricia, you're literally the only person in the neighborhood with that haircut. And we have 4 different camera angles. Would you like to see them all?" She straightened up, switching tactics. "Even if, and I'm not admitting anything, but even if that were me, perhaps it was justified." Justified? I could feel my blood pressure rising. How is ruining a children's birthday party ever justified? "Your outdoor lighting fixtures exceed the allowable lumens specified in Section 7 of the HOA Covenant," she said, her voice taking on that official tone she used at meetings. "I've documented at least 6 violations in the past month, and my formal complaints have been ignored." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "So you destroyed our pool because our patio lights are too bright? My kids are inside crying right now because their party is ruined." "Rules exist for a reason, Adam," she said coldly. "If you'd simply complied with the notifications I sent." "We never received any notifications about lighting," I interrupted. "And even if we had, this isn't how reasonable adults handle disputes." Something shifted in her eyes then, a flash of something almost like fear, quickly replaced by defensiveness. "I think you should leave my property now. This conversation is over." "It's far from over," I said. "The party was approved by the HOA board. We have all the proper documentation. What you did wasn't just mean, it was vandalism. That's a crime, Patricia." "Are you threatening me?" Her voice took on a shrill edge. "I'm stating facts. We have video evidence of you trespassing and damaging our property." "Well, if you're so concerned about rules and legality," she snapped, "perhaps we should involve the authorities." "Maybe we should," I replied, surprised at how calm I felt despite the rage bubbling inside me. We stared at each other for what felt like an eternity. Finally, Patricia broke the silence. "I want you off my property in the next 30 seconds or I'm calling the police," she said, her voice ice cold. I took a step back. "You know what, Patricia? Go ahead. Call them. I'm sure they'd be very interested in this video." Her only response was to slam the door in my face. As I walked back to my house, I could see neighbors watching from windows and porches. News traveled fast in Sunny Pines Estates. By noon, everyone would know what had happened. Back home, Sarah was on the phone, calling all the parents to cancel the party. The kids had retreated to their rooms, too upset to even argue about having to stay home. The half-decorated house seemed to mock our earlier excitement. "What did she say?" Sarah asked as I came in. "She denied it at first, then tried to justify it with some nonsense about our patio lights being too bright," I said, collapsing onto a chair. No apology, no offer to help. "She threatened to call the police on me." "The police? For what?" "For standing on her precious property, I guess." I ran my hands through my hair, feeling helpless and furious all at once. "What are we going to do, Sarah? The pool service can't fix this for days." Sarah sat beside me, taking my hand. "We'll reschedule the party. The kids will understand eventually." But I couldn't accept that. I couldn't let Patricia win, couldn't let her steal this joy from my children with no consequences. "There has to be something we can do," I said, more to myself than to Sarah. I had no idea then that something would turn into a revenge plan that would change the power balance of Sunny Pines Estates forever, and create the soapiest disaster our neighborhood had ever seen. After the confrontation with Patricia, I was fuming. The kind of anger that sits in your chest like a hot coal, making it hard to think straight. Sarah was upstairs with the kids, trying to cheer them up with promises of a bigger, better party, once the pool is fixed. I paced around our living room, scrolling through my phone trying to find some solution. Any solution that could save the day. Pool cleaning services all said the same thing: drain, scrub, refill. 3 to 4 days minimum. The doorbell rang, pulling me from my thoughts. It was Mike, wearing an expression of genuine concern. "Hey man. Heard what happened," he said. "Listen, the kids are welcome to use our pool today if you want. Not the same as their own party, I know, but..." I was touched by the offer. "Thanks, Mike. Seriously. But I don't think they're up for any kind of swimming right now." He nodded, understanding. "Mind if I see it?" he asked, gesturing toward our backyard. We walked around to the back, where the pool was now a frothy mess of chemical bubbles. The smell of laundry detergent hung heavy in the air. "Jesus," Mike whispered. "She really did a number on it. Got her on camera and everything," I said. "Not that it matters. She doesn't care." Mike shook his head, disgust evident on his face. "Classic Patricia. You know, this isn't even the worst thing she's done. Remember the Johnsons I told you about? Before they moved? She actually called CPS on them because their kids were playing unsupervised in their own fenced backyard. She what? I was shocked. Oh yeah. Nothing came of it, of course, but they were terrified. Decided it wasn't worth it and moved a month later. He kicked at a pebble on the ground. That's her MO. Make people so miserable they give up. Something in me hardened at those words. I wasn't going to give up. I wasn't going to let her win. Can I ask you something? I said to Mike. If you were me, what would you do? He looked thoughtful for a moment, then spoke carefully. Honestly? I'd make sure she faced consequences. Real ones. The HOA board is useless. She's got half of them in her pocket, and the other half are too scared to challenge her. So what then? Legal action? That could take months. Mike looked at the pool, then back at me. You know, he said slowly, the thing about Patricia is that she cares about appearances more than anything. Her reputation. Her standing in the community. And, he hesitated. You know she's entering the garden competition this weekend, right? She's won 3 years running. Her garden is her pride and joy, all those weird hybrid roses and whatever else she spends her free time obsessing over. I nodded, not quite seeing where he was going. Have you noticed, Mike continued, how your yard slopes down toward hers? Natural drainage pattern of the whole block. And then it clicked. I looked at my pool full of detergent, then at the gentle slope that ran from our property down to Patricia's prized garden. The garden that was currently meticulously prepared for the competition inspection tomorrow. Mike, I said slowly, are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting? He held up his hands. I'm not suggesting anything. Just making an observation about local topography. But there was a gleam in his eye that told me he understood exactly what had crossed my mind. After Mike left, I called the pool company back. Not to ask about cleaning, I had other questions now. So, to drain a pool like mine, I asked casually, how would that work exactly? The technician explained the process. They'd bring a submersible pump, hook it up to a long discharge hose, and direct the water to a proper drainage area, usually the street storm drain. And how long would it take to drain completely? I asked. Depends on the pump, but with our standard equipment, probably 6 to 8 hours for a pool your size. And what if someone wanted to do it themselves? Hypothetically. There was a pause on the line. Well, you could rent a pump from a hardware store. But I wouldn't recommend it unless you know what you're doing. After getting the details, I thanked him and hung up. I sat there for a long while, thinking about what I was considering. It would be deliberate. Calculated. Not a momentary lapse in judgment, but a conscious choice. Adam? Sarah's voice startled me. She had come downstairs without me noticing. What are you thinking about? You've got that look. What look? The one you get when you're plotting something. Like when you surprised me with those concert tickets last year. I hesitated, then decided to be honest. I'm thinking about draining the pool. Well, yes, that's what we'll have to do to fix it. No, I mean. I took a deep breath. I'm thinking about draining it tonight. And directing the water toward Patricia's garden. Sarah's eyes widened. Adam? Her garden that's being judged tomorrow, I continued. For the competition she cares about more than anything. Sarah sat down next to me, concern written across her face. That would be deliberate, Adam. That would be giving her a taste of her own medicine, I finished. She ruined something our kids care about. Why shouldn't she experience the same thing? Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Then, to my surprise, she didn't immediately shut down the idea. If we did this, and I'm not saying we should, but if we did, wouldn't it be obvious it was us? Not if we're careful, I said, already working through the logistics in my mind. We drain it overnight, make it look like an accident, like maybe the garden hose was left running in the wrong direction. Sarah bit her lip, clearly torn. This isn't like you, Adam. Neither is watching our kids cry all day because some power-hungry neighbor ruined their birthday over patio lights. We sat in silence, the weight of what we were considering hanging between us. Finally, Sarah spoke. I'm not saying yes, but I'm not saying no either. Let's think about this carefully before we do anything we can't take back. But I already knew what I was going to do. The question now was how to do it in a way that would look like an unfortunate accident, an oops, if you will, rather than the deliberate act of revenge it was. After a day of consoling disappointed children and fielding calls from confused parents, nighttime couldn't come fast enough. Sarah had gone to bed early, deliberately not asking about my plans. Her final words to me were simply, whatever happens, I don't want to know the details. That was fine by me, plausible deniability was probably for the best. I waited until the house was quiet, until the neighborhood lights had mostly gone dark. It was nearly 11 p.m. when I finally slipped out to the garage, dressed in dark clothes and carrying a flashlight with a red filter, less noticeable at night. Earlier that day, I'd made a trip to the hardware store, casually purchasing a submersible pump, a long drainage hose and a few other supplies. The cashier had asked if I was having pool problems, and I'd explained about a necessary drainage for cleaning. Not technically a lie. Now, I carefully unboxed the pump in the garage, reading through the instructions twice to make sure I understood exactly how it worked. I didn't want any loud motor noises waking up the neighborhood, or worse, malfunctioning and flooding our own property instead. Once I was confident in the setup, I gathered everything and made my way to the backyard. The night was still, with just enough moonlight to see without the flashlight. Perfect conditions. Our pool was still a sudsy mess, though some of the bubbles had subsided throughout the day, leaving a filmy layer on the surface. The chemical smell remained strong, a constant reminder of Patricia's sabotage. I positioned the pump in the deep end of the pool, connected the drainage hose and carefully laid it out along the natural slope of our yard, extending it toward the property line we shared with Patricia. Her award-winning garden sat just beyond, meticulously arranged and groomed to perfection for tomorrow's judging. The hose wasn't long enough to reach directly into her garden. That would be too obvious. Instead, I positioned it at the property line, at a spot where the natural drainage would carry the water downhill to her precious flower beds. There was a moment right before I plugged in the pump, where I hesitated. Was I really going to do this? Was I becoming just as petty as Patricia? But then I remembered Amina's tears, Zane's defeated expression, and Patricia's complete lack of remorse. I plugged in the pump. The motor hummed to life, quieter than I expected, thankfully. I watched as water began flowing through the transparent section of hose near the pump. Soapy, detergent-filled water that would soon be making its way toward Patricia Wilson's prized roses and exotic imported plants. According to my calculations, it would take about 6 to 7 hours to drain the pool completely. The pump would finish its work around dawn before most of the neighborhood was awake. By the time anyone noticed, it would just look like an unfortunate drainage accident. A pool owner dealing with a contaminated pool, perhaps not realizing the impact the drainage would have on a neighboring property. I checked all the connections one last time, made sure the hose was secure and wouldn't shift during the night, and then went back inside. There was nothing to do now but wait. Sleep didn't come easily. I lay in bed next to Sarah, listening to the faint hum of the pump outside, wondering if I'd gone too far, or not far enough. Eventually, exhaustion won out, and I drifted off to the thought of Patricia's face when she discovered her garden. What I didn't account for was how the Florida humidity would interact with all that detergent-laden water. I didn't consider how the slope between our properties was steeper than it appeared. And I certainly didn't anticipate the change in wind direction that would occur just before dawn. These factors would combine to create something far beyond a simple oops moment. As I would soon discover, I hadn't just created a minor inconvenience for Patricia Wilson. I had unleashed a suburban disaster of epic proportions. Dad, wake up. You have to see this. I jolted awake to Zane shaking my shoulder, his voice urgent and excited. Sunlight was streaming through the blinds. I'd overslept. The clock read 6:47 a.m. What's wrong? I mumbled, my mind still foggy from too little sleep. Nothing's wrong. It's awesome. Come see. He was practically bouncing on his toes, a complete transformation from the dejected boy of yesterday. Sarah stirred beside me. What's going on? I don't know, but apparently it's awesome, I said, throwing off the covers and following Zane, who was already racing down the hallway. Amina met us at the bottom of the stairs, her eyes wide with wonder. Daddy? There's a bubble monster eating Mrs. Wilson's house. What? I hurried to the back door, my heart suddenly racing. The moment I stepped onto our patio, I froze in disbelief. It wasn't a bubble monster. It was worse. Or better. I honestly couldn't tell. A massive wall of foam, and I mean massive, had formed between our property and Patricia's. It stood at least 10 feet high in places, undulating slightly in the morning breeze like some kind of alien landscape. But it wasn't contained to just the garden. Oh no. The foam had spread everywhere, covering her perfectly manicured lawn, her driveway, even creeping up the sides of her house like some kind of aggressive marshmallow creature. And in the middle of it all, wearing a silk bathrobe and rubber gardening boots, was Patricia Wilson. She was frantically spraying the foam with a garden hose, which, to my horror and secret delight, was only making the situation worse. Each blast of water created more foam, spreading the Soapy disaster further across her property. "Oh my God," I whispered. Sarah appeared beside me, coffee mug in hand. She took one look at the scene and her jaw dropped. "Adam, what did you do?" I just drained the pool," I stammered. "I didn't expect this." By now, other neighbors were emerging from their homes, drawn by the commotion. Some were openly laughing. Others were taking videos with their phones. A few looked concerned, but no one was rushing to help Patricia, who was now screaming something about her prized begonias. Mike walked over to join us, barely suppressing a grin. "Morning, Cons. Lovely day, isn't it?" "Mike, I swear I didn't mean for this to happen," I said quietly. "I just wanted to drain the pool toward her garden, not create whatever this is." He nodded, but there was a twinkle in his eye. "Must be all that detergent she put in your pool, combined with the morning dew and the sprinkler system that waters her garden automatically at 5 a.m. I groaned. "The sprinklers. I hadn't thought about that. Plus," Mike continued, enjoying this far too much, "there was a wind shift around dawn. Weather report said it would happen, but I guess not everyone checks the forecast." "What do I do?" I asked, watching as the foam continued to grow despite Patricia's increasingly frantic efforts. "Well," Sarah said, taking a sip of her coffee, "we should probably go over and offer to help, since we're such good neighbors and all." The look we exchanged contained multitudes. She knew. Of course she knew what I'd done. And surprisingly, she didn't seem upset. If anything, there was a hint of satisfaction in her expression. "Kids, stay here," I instructed, trying to sound responsible. "Mom and I are going to see if Mrs. Wilson needs help." But we want to play in the bubbles," Amina protested. "Maybe later," Sarah said, which was definitely not a no. As we approached Patricia's property, navigating around mounds of foam that were now spilling onto the sidewalk, I schooled my features into what I hoped was an expression of concerned surprise. "Patricia," I called out. "What on earth happened here?" She whirled around, her normally perfect hair plastered to her head with soapy residue, her silk robe dotted with foam clumps. "If looks could kill, I'd have dropped dead on the spot." "You," she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You did this." I feigned confusion. "Did what?" "We just woke up to all this commotion. What's going on?" "Don't play innocent with me." She was practically foaming at the mouth, a phrase that now had new meaning to me. "You deliberately flooded my garden with your pool water." Other neighbors had gathered now, forming a loose semicircle around the confrontation. I was acutely aware of all the phone cameras pointed in our direction. "Well," I said slowly, "I did have to drain my pool after someone filled it with detergent. But I directed the drainage toward the street." Another lie, but one I was committed to now. "I had no idea it would affect your property." "Liar," she sputtered. "This is deliberate sabotage. The garden competition judges will be here in," she checked her watch and let out a wail, "4 hours. Maybe they'll give you extra points for creativity," someone in the crowd suggested, triggering a wave of laughter. Patricia's face contorted with rage. "This isn't funny. This is destruction of property. I'm calling the police." "The same police who might be interested in this security footage?" I asked quietly, pulling out my phone. "Of someone trespassing on my property at 4:48 yesterday morning?" The color drained from her face. Before she could respond, we heard the sound of a vehicle approaching. A local news van was pulling up to the curb, a reporter and cameraman already jumping out. "Anonymous tip," Mike whispered in my ear, having sidled up beside me. "Thought this story deserved a wider audience." And that's how the Great Sunny Pines foam disaster made the 12 o'clock news, with footage of Patricia's foam-covered property broadcast across Tampa Bay. But it wasn't just the physical disaster that was exposed, it was the months of HOA tyranny, the pattern of harassment, and ultimately, the security footage of her sabotaging a children's birthday party. I'd wanted consequences for Patricia. I'd wanted her to feel a fraction of the disappointment my kids had felt. But I never anticipated the scale of what would happen. A soapy disaster that would change our neighborhood forever. By mid-morning, Sunny Pines Estates had transformed into something between a disaster zone and an impromptu block party. The foam situation at Patricia's house had only slightly improved, despite the fire department showing up with special equipment to help contain the spread. They'd responded to her frantic 911 call about chemical flooding. What was truly remarkable, though, was the neighborhood's response. Instead of being annoyed by the disruption, people were celebrating. Mike had set up a folding table at the end of his driveway with a coffee urn, a box of donuts, and a handwritten sign that read Foam Disaster Viewing Party. At least 15 neighbors were gathered there, chatting and laughing, many still in their pajamas or bathrobes. Adam, Sarah. Mike called out as we approached, having retreated from Patricia's property when the firefighters arrived. Coffee? Donuts? Front row seats to karma in action. I accepted a cup gratefully, still processing the morning's events. I can't believe how this escalated, I admitted quietly to Mike. He shrugged, unconcerned. Sometimes the universe delivers exactly what's needed. Speaking of which. He nodded toward an SUV pulling up. Channel 7 News has arrived. The plot thickens. The reporter, a cheerful woman with a professional smile, made a beeline for our group. I understand there's quite a situation here this morning, she said, microphone in hand, cameraman trailing behind her. Would anyone care to explain what happened? There was an awkward pause and I suddenly realized everyone was looking at me. Great. Before I could formulate a diplomatic response, an elderly woman I recognized from 3 doors down stepped forward. Mrs. Abernathy, if I remembered correctly. She had to be at least 80, with perfectly styled silver hair and the confident air of someone who had run out of patience decades ago. I'll tell you what happened, she said firmly. That woman, she pointed toward Patricia's house, has been terrorizing this neighborhood for years with her ridiculous rules and her power trips. Someone finally stood up to her, and I for one am thrilled. The reporter looked delighted at this candid response. So this is about more than just a foam incident? And then, like a dam breaking, the story started pouring out. Neighbors I'd barely spoken to stepped forward with their Patricia Wilson horror stories. She fined me $200 because my Christmas lights were up for 3 days longer than the HOA allows. She sent a tape measure over the fence to check if my kid's swing set was the approved height. She reported my service dog as an unauthorized pet and tried to have us evicted. She called the city on my mother who was staying with us, claiming we were running an illegal boarding house. Each story was more outrageous than the last. The reporter was scribbling notes frantically, occasionally glancing toward Patricia's property where the firefighters were now arguing with her about the best way to remove the foam from her koi pond. I found myself standing next to Mrs. Abernathy, who gave me a knowing smile. I saw you dragging that pump and hose around last night, she said quietly. Don't worry, dear. My late husband Harold always said revenge is a dish best served with plausible deniability. I felt my face flush. Oh, save it, she waved dismissively. That woman put detergent in your children's pool. On their birthday, no less. If you hadn't done something, I was considering slashing her tires myself. I wasn't sure whether to be alarmed or impressed by this sweet-looking octogenarian's capacity for vengeance. Sarah joined us, holding Zane and Amina's hands. Despite our best efforts to keep them in the house, they'd insisted on seeing the foam disaster up close. Is Mrs. Wilson going to jail? Zane asked, loud enough for several nearby neighbors to hear. No, honey, Sarah said quickly. But she might be in trouble for what she did to our pool. Good, Amina declared with the simple justice of a 6-year-old. She's mean. The reporter, overhearing this exchange, immediately headed our way. Excuse me, she said, but did I understand correctly that someone deliberately contaminated your pool? And there's evidence. This was spiraling out of control. I hadn't planned for any of this. The news coverage, the public airing of neighborhood grievances, my children being interviewed on local television. But before I could intervene, Mike had smoothly stepped in, showing the reporter the security footage on his phone. This was yesterday morning, he explained. The Wilson woman sneaking into their backyard to pour detergent in the pool. Right before a children's birthday party. Both cameras caught it clearly. The reporter's eyes widened. She turned to me. And you are? Adam Khan, I said reluctantly. Look, this whole situation has gotten out of hand. We just wanted to celebrate their children's birthdays, Sarah interjected, squeezing my hand in warning. Which was approved by the HOA, following all guidelines. My husband is too polite to say it, but we've been harassed since moving here 8 months ago. I watched in a mixture of awe and horror as my wife, my diplomatic, peacemaking wife, skillfully painted us as the sympathetic victims in this saga, carefully omitting any mention of deliberate pool drainage or revenge plots. By noon, what had started as a simple act of retribution had evolved into a full-blown neighborhood revolution. Someone had started a petition to overhaul the HOA bylaws. Another group was planning an emergency meeting to discuss Patricia's position as board president. Through it all, the foam continued to dissipate under the Florida sun, leaving behind a soapy residue that would make Patricia's garden smell like laundry detergent for weeks. As we stood in the middle of this chaos, watching our quiet suburban community transform before our eyes, Sarah leaned close and whispered, "Still think moving to Florida was boring?" By evening, the foam had mostly dissipated, leaving behind Patricia's garden in a state that could only be described as catastrophic. Her prized roses drooped pathetically, coated in a filmy residue. The carefully arranged rock formations were hidden under pools of soapy water. And the koi in her pond, well, let's just say they'd had an unexpected bubble bath. The garden competition judges had arrived as scheduled, only to find a disaster zone. According to Mike, who had somehow appointed himself the neighborhood's official gossip coordinator, Patricia had tried to convince them to postpone the judging. When that failed, she'd attempted to blame environmental sabotage for her garden's condition. The judges, unimpressed, had simply moved on to the next contestant. For the first time in 4 years, Patricia Wilson would not be winning Sunny Pine's Garden of the Year. But that was just the beginning of her troubles. At 7 p.m. sharp, an emergency HOA meeting had been called at the community clubhouse. I'd received the email notification shortly after giving my statement to the police, who, to my surprise, seemed more interested in Patricia's trespassing and vandalism than in my questionable pool drainage decisions. "Do we really have to go?" I asked Sarah as we arranged for a last-minute babysitter. The kids were exhausted from the day's excitement and from playing in the lingering foam that had drifted onto public areas, despite my half-hearted warnings about chemicals. "Absolutely," she replied, applying a fresh coat of lipstick with determined precision. "This is the moment when everything changes, Adam. We need to be there." She was right, of course. This wasn't just about our personal vendetta anymore. The entire neighborhood had been energized by the day's events, years of frustrations bubbling to the surface like detergent in a pool. The clubhouse was packed when we arrived. Every chair was filled, with additional residents standing along the walls. At the front, the remaining HOA board members sat at a table looking distinctly uncomfortable. Patricia's chair was conspicuously empty. "She's not coming," whispered Mrs. Abernathy, who had somehow saved us seats despite the crowd. "Locked herself in her house with the blinds drawn. Smart move, really." The meeting was called to order by the vice president, a nervous-looking man named Doug who had always seemed to be Patricia's loyal lieutenant. Now, however, he appeared distinctly unsure of himself. "Given the unusual circumstances of today's events," he began, "and the serious allegations that have come to light, we felt it necessary to hold this emergency session." What followed was 2 hours of the most dramatic community meeting I'd ever witnessed. One by one, residents stood up to share their experiences with Patricia's reign of HOA terror. Stories ranged from the absurd, being fined for having a bird feeder that attracted unauthorized wildlife, to the genuinely disturbing, an immigrant family who had been repeatedly targeted with spurious code violations. The security footage of Patricia dumping detergent in our pool was shown on the clubhouse's projector screen, eliciting gasps from those who hadn't yet seen it. Sarah squeezed my hand tightly as we watched it again, the black and white images somehow more damning in this official setting. When my turn came to speak, I kept it simple and factual. Yes, Patricia had vandalized our pool before a children's birthday party. Yes, we had security footage proving it. No, I had no idea how my pool drainage had resulted in such an extensive foam situation at her property. This last part was received with knowing glances and a few poorly suppressed smiles. By 9 p.m. the outcome was inevitable. The board, reading the room, called for a vote of no confidence in Patricia's leadership. It passed unanimously. A second vote to remove her from the board entirely passed with similar enthusiasm. But the community wasn't finished. Someone proposed a committee to review and revise the entire HOA bylaws, with an emphasis on reasonable enforcement and clear appeals processes. Another suggested monthly community gatherings to rebuild the neighborhood spirit that had been damaged by years of Patricia's dictatorial approach. As the meeting finally adjourned, I found myself surrounded by neighbors I'd barely spoken to before, all offering support and sharing contact information. People who had been living in isolated fear of HOA retribution were suddenly connecting, laughing, planning. "You did this," Sarah whispered as we walked home under the stars. "You turned a neighborhood of strangers into a community." "I just wanted to drain some soapy water into her precious garden," I admitted. "I didn't mean to start a revolution." She laughed, linking her arm through mine. "Sometimes the best revolutions are the accidental ones." When we got home, the babysitter reported that the kids had fallen asleep talking excitedly about having a do-over pool party, now that the mean lady was in trouble. I felt a profound sense of satisfaction knowing that they had seen justice unfold, messy and imperfect but justice nonetheless. As I checked my phone one last time before bed, I saw a text from Mike, Channel 7 running the story at 11. Set your DVR. You're about to be famous. I groaned, showing the message to Sarah. At least they can't fine us for being on the news, she quipped. That bylaw is getting revised. 3 weeks after what locals were now calling the Great Foam Disaster, our neighborhood had transformed in ways I never could have imagined. The physical evidence of that chaotic morning had long since washed away, but the changes it sparked were proving far more permanent. The most obvious change? Patricia Wilson's house was on the market. A for sale sign appeared in her front yard just 10 days after the incident, and according to neighborhood intelligence aka Mike, she had already purchased a condo in a different community across town. No one had seen her in person since the day of the foam explosion. She'd hired professional cleaners to restore her property and a realtor to handle everything else. Good riddance, Mrs. Abernathy declared when the sign went up. She'd become something of a surrogate grandmother to our kids since the incident, often bringing over her world-famous chocolate chip cookies and sharing stories about the neighborhood back when it was friendly. But Patricia's departure was just the beginning. The interim HOA board, which now included Sarah, who had been practically drafted into service, had already implemented several significant changes. The most popular by far, a complete moratorium on fines and violations while the bylaws were being rewritten. We're calling it the reset period, Sarah explained at dinner one night. A chance for everyone to take a breath and think about what kind of community we actually want to live in. The effects were immediate and heartwarming. Children's playsets that had been hidden in garages for fear of violations suddenly appeared in backyards. Holiday decorations that had been hastily removed resurfaced, even though Easter was months away. One family even painted their front door a brilliant shade of red, a direct violation of the old approved exterior colors palette. As for our pool, the professional cleaning service had restored it to its former glory, though at considerable expense. We'd considered filing an insurance claim or even taking legal action against Patricia to recover the costs, but ultimately decided it wasn't worth prolonging the drama. Consider it an investment in neighborhood peace, I told Sarah as we signed the eye-watering check for the pool service. The real victory came 2 weeks after the incident, when we finally held the rescheduled birthday party for Zane and Amina. Not only did all the original invitees attend, but several neighborhood kids who hadn't been on the list initially begged to come. We ended up with nearly 30 children splashing in our now pristine pool, with parents chatting amicably around the patio. Mike brought over his backyard grill to help with the increased food demands. Mrs. Abernathy arrived with enough cupcakes to feed a small army. Even Doug from the HOA board stopped by with a gift for each of our kids. His way of apologizing for not reining in Patricia sooner, he explained sheepishly. As I watched the celebration unfold, Zane showing off his cannonball technique, Amina giggling with her new friends, Sarah deep in conversation with neighbors who were rapidly becoming true friends, I felt a contentment I hadn't experienced since moving to Florida. Quite the turnaround, huh? Mike said, appearing beside me with 2 cold beers. He handed me one in clink bottles. I never expected any of this, I admitted. I just wanted a little petty revenge. Sometimes the universe has bigger plans, he said philosophically. One man's petty revenge becomes an entire community's liberation. That's surprisingly profound for a guy wearing flamingo swim trunks, I laughed. Hey, these were strictly forbidden under the old regime, he said, gesturing to his admittedly eye-searing swimwear. I'm exercising my newfound freedom. Later that evening, as the party wound down and the last guest departed with soggy towels and sugar crash children, Sarah and I sat at the edge of the pool, feet dangling in the water. You know what's funny? She said, leaning against my shoulder. If Patricia had just let us have our pool party in the first place, none of this would have happened. She'd still be ruling the neighborhood with her clipboard and yellow envelopes. Poetic justice, I agreed. Though I still feel a little guilty about the whole drainage thing. Sarah laughed. Don't. The fire chief told me that what happened wasn't just because of the drainage. It was because her sprinkler system was set to an illegal water pressure level, higher than county regulations allow. She was breaking rules while enforcing them on everyone else. Of course she was, I said unsurprised. Classic Patricia. As if on cue, Zane and Amina joined us at the pool's edge, still in their swimsuits despite the setting sun. This was the best party ever, Zane declared. Way better than our first plan. And nobody put soap in the pool this time, Amina added solemnly. I couldn't help but laugh. No, nobody did. And nobody's going to. Promise? They both asked in unison. Promise, I assured them, looking around at our backyard, our home, our now thriving community. I think those days are behind us. The following weekend, at the first ever Sunny Pines monthly community pool day, hosted in our backyard naturally, Mike unveiled a surprise, a custom-made sign for our pool area. It reads simply, "No detergent allowed." Seriously, you've been warned. It remains there to this day, a small but perfect reminder that sometimes, the most unexpected disasters lead to the most beautiful resolutions. It's been 6 months since the Great Foam disaster, and I still can't believe how much our lives have changed. What started as a simple move to Florida for better weather and a fresh start turned into a suburban soap opera that none of us could have predicted. Patricia's house sold quickly, to a young family with 3 kids and a dog, ironically everything she used to complain about. They've already become fixtures at our regular neighborhood gatherings, their children fast friends with Zane and Amina. Their dog, a massive golden retriever named Buddy, frequently escapes their yard to visit our pool. No one minds. The revised HOA bylaws were finalized last month after countless community meetings and surprisingly passionate debates about everything from holiday decorations to mailbox designs. The new document is 1/3 the length of the original, focuses on community standards rather than punitive measures and, my personal favorite, includes a specific clause prohibiting the dumping of foreign substances into neighbors' pools. Sarah insists she had nothing to do with that particular addition, but the wink she gives when it's mentioned suggests otherwise. Our neighborhood has transformed in 1,000 small ways. Front porches that once stood empty are now gathering places. Children play freely between yards without fear of violation notices. Last weekend, we even had our first community-wide garage sale, something Patricia had expressly forbidden due to unsightly crowd potential. As for us, the cons? We're thriving. The kids love their school and have more friends than we can keep track of. Sarah was recently elected HOA president, despite her protests, running on a platform of reasonable enforcement and maximum enjoyment. And me? I've become something of a local legend. At community events, newcomers are often told in hushed, reverent tones about the foam incident and how it changed everything. I wish I could say I planned it all, the community transformation, the overthrow of the HOA regime, the newfound neighborhood spirit. But the truth is much simpler and more accidental. I was just a dad who wanted his kids to have a nice birthday party, who reached his breaking point with a bully, and who happened to underestimate the explosive potential of detergent in Florida humidity. Sometimes the most profound changes come from the smallest actions. Sometimes standing up to a neighborhood tyrant requires nothing more than a pool pump, a garden hose, and the courage to say, enough. And sometimes, just sometimes, a disaster can be the best thing that ever happens to a community. As for the rumors that I'm planning a neighborhood-wide foam party for the 1-year anniversary of the incident, I can neither confirm nor deny. But I will say this, I've learned a lot about the proper ratio of detergent to water, and I've got Mike working on special effects. After all, every revolution deserves a proper celebration. And every neighborhood deserves a little soapy chaos now and then.